To get started on your Merimekko and Maija Isola inspired pattern design project, you're going to choose one of the wildflowers from your packet. I would recommend sketching out a few different kinds of flowers and then choosing your favorite to move forward with. We want to be creating stylized drawings of our flowers. So it doesn't necessarily have to be super realistic, but we want nice bold lines. We want a clean design. So if it's not too detailed and super realistic, that's okay. But we want a nice, bright, bold drawing of your flower. I chose the columbine flower and I drew it out in my sketchbook and then I copied it onto this small piece of tag board. After it's drawn out, I'm going to cut it out and it will be used as a tracer to create my repeating pattern. To create your repeating pattern, you can start just along the edge the way I did. You could start with your flower maybe halfway off of your page. It's up to you, but you're going to hold your pencil very lightly and gently trace around that tracer. Maybe if you're struggling, have a friend hold your tracer down while you trace around it. Just go lightly around your edge in case you need to fix any details. You can trace your repeating pattern on your paper a bunch of times and then go back in to do your details. Or if you'd like, the way that I did, you can go in and add your details as you draw each one. This method is completely up to you, and whichever technique you prefer is fine with me. Just make sure that you're really paying attention when you're drawing those internal details to try to make each individual flower look as identical as possible. After each flower is drawn out in pencil, you're going to go back and trace all your details very carefully with a thin Sharpie. After you're done with your Sharpie, you're going to go in and erase every single pencil line so your paper is nice and clean. Be careful that you don't bunch your paper up as you're erasing the way that I did, but just nice and neat so we're only left with your Sharpie lines. When painting these designs, we're going to be using contrasting colors. Contrasting colors are directly across from each other on the color wheel, and they're going to help make your designs really bold and pop out very nicely. We'll be using watercolor for this step. You're going to get your brush, make it nice and wet, and tap your wet paintbrush right on your paint. You want the paint to be nice and wet so that it goes onto your paper easily. You are not going to take your paintbrush and dig it into the paint. You want the paint to be wet so it flows really nicely. I would recommend painting either your flowers first or your backgrounds first. Do not try to paint your flowers while your background's wet. Do not try to paint your background while your flowers are wet. That's going to cause your two colors to bleed into each other and it's going to just get really messy. So I'm doing orange and blue contrasting colors. I'm going to get my flowers orange and my background's going to be blue. The more paint you have on your brush, the brighter your colors are going to be. We can go in and do this in steps. I went back and added a lot of layers to my colors, so as a layer dries, we can add more. You don't want to pack too much color on all at once because it could cause it to bubble over and spill and just make a big mess on your paintings. I would fill your flowers and then let them dry, and then later we'll do more coats if you need your colors to be a little bit brighter. Really focus on brush control when painting your flowers. You don't want your color to go too far outside the lines because it'll create a big brown muddy mess once your colors mix together. So wet paintbrush, wet paint, and you paint your flowers in. Once your flowers are completely dry, you can start working on your background. Remember, we're talking about contrasting colors, so opposite on the color wheel. For your background, you can paint the same way you did your flowers with just wet paint on a dry paper, or you can try a wet on wet effect. That means taking your paintbrush with just water, wetting carefully an area, make sure you're not getting your flowers wet. We're going to just really carefully work around them. Then tapping your wet paintbrush on your wet paint, you can tap your paint onto that wet area and it'll help create a really fun blending technique. But again, be very careful with your brush control so that your colors don't bleed together. I did say that you can go back in layers once certain sections are dry to make your colors brighter if you prefer. So now that my background was dry, I went in to make my orange flowers pop a little more, added some more color. At this point, you guys can see that my paper is starting to warp. So there was so much water on my paper that it was soaking it up and it starts to get really bubbly. If that is happening to you, I want us to make sure that we're being especially careful with our watercolor because that'll cause the paint to move around and it could mess up areas that you worked hard on. So if yours starts to bleed out of your flowers the way that mine did, grab a paper towel, kind of dot on your color where it's getting out of the lines, and that should soak it up really nicely for you. But just be mindful that if your paper is starting to warp, that your watercolors will move. So we want to be really careful while we're painting and really careful as you're making your way to the drying rack with these wet paintings. Take your time if you're going back in layers in your flowers or in your background that your colors don't bleed together.